The man outside wanted to sell me. The man inside the car, he just looked at me, cold, unhurried, like he'd been expecting this, and said 4 words. Close the door, stay down. I did. That was the moment I stopped running from a monster and walked straight into the arms of a dragon. If a girl escaping one nightmare only to land in the lap of the most dangerous man in the city sounds like your kind of story, you're in the right place. Subscribe, drop your city and the time you're watching, because in the next 10 seconds, my entire life changes. The bruise on my arm was still yellowing, the shape of Mike's fingers, a fading souvenir from 3 days ago because I bought the wrong coffee. That was my life. Calculated smallness, quiet breathing, a woman who had learned to take up as little space as possible because the man I loved had made too much his favorite weapon against me. I stayed because I believed him. I stayed until this morning, until I found the burner phone taped under the bathroom sink, full of texts about pricing and delivery dates and a number with too many zeros. Mike wasn't going to hurt me this time, he was going to trade me. I had 60 seconds and 1 pair of shoes. I ran, and I chose the wrong car. His voice didn't rise. That was the first thing I noticed. Outside, Mike was screaming my name like a man who owned it, ragged, furious, the kind of voice that had trained my nervous system to shrink on contact. I could hear his footsteps on the concrete, circling, getting closer. My fingers were pressed flat against the floor of the sedan, heart slamming so hard I was sure the man above me could hear it. But he just watched the window. Stay down. 2 words. No panic, no irritation. The voice of someone who had never once in his life needed to repeat himself. I stayed down. Through the tinted glass, I could see Mike's silhouette stop near the hood of the car. He was on his phone now, breathing hard, scanning the garage. I squeezed my eyes shut and pressed my cheek against leather so expensive it didn't even creak beneath me. The man in the back seat didn't move, didn't speak, didn't reach for me or push me away. He simply sat there in the dark, one arm resting along the door, watching Mike the way a person watches something small and temporary, with absolute patience and zero concern. The driver in the front hadn't flinched either. These men were carved from a different material than anyone I had ever been near. Mike kicked something metal, a trash can maybe, the clatter echoing through the garage. "Fiona!" The word bounced off the concrete walls and landed in my chest like a fist. Old muscle memory pulled at me. Apologize, come out, make it smaller. The man above me shifted slightly, just his eyes, cutting down to where I was curled on the floor. In the low amber light bleeding through the windows, I finally saw his face. Sharp jaw, dark suit, a calm so complete it felt almost violent. He looked at me the way a man looks at something he has already decided about. Then he looked back at Mike. And for the first time, I watched someone look at Mike Donovan and feel absolutely nothing. No fear, no urgency, just the quiet territorial stillness of a man in his own kingdom, unbothered by the noise at the gate. A long minute passed, then Mike's footsteps retreated, his voice grew distant, then disappeared entirely, swallowed by the sounds of the city outside. The sedan didn't move for another 30 seconds. Then, without looking at me, the man spoke again, unhurried, precise, each word placed like a stone. "You can sit up now." I pushed myself upright slowly, back against the seat, hands trembling in my lap. I turned to face him fully for the first time. He was already looking at me, studying me, the way you study something unexpected, not with warmth, not with threat, but with the careful measuring attention of a man recalculating. "Who are you running from?" I asked. Swallowed. "My boyfriend." Something moved behind his eyes. Not surprise, not sympathy. Recognition. "And who is he running to?" he said quietly. My stomach dropped, because somehow this stranger already knew the answer.
The elevator didn't have buttons. That was the first thing I noticed. No floor numbers, no panel, no emergency phone bolted to the wall. Just brushed steel on all four sides and a single biometric pad that the man, I still didn't know his name, pressed his thumb to without looking. The doors slid shut with the soft, pressurized seal of a vault. We rode up in silence. I counted seconds because I needed something to hold on to. I got to 41 before the doors opened again. The penthouse hit me like a held breath finally released, enormous and immaculate, all floor-to-ceiling glass and cold white marble, and air that smelled faintly of cedar and something metallic I couldn't name. The city sprawled below us in every direction, glittering and indifferent, so far down it looked like something that happened to other people. There were men stationed near the entrance, 2 of them, suits dark, hands folded, eyes tracking me with the flat professional attention of people paid to notice everything and react to nothing. A woman in a crisp gray blazer appeared from a side hall, exchanged 3 quiet words with him in Korean, and disappeared again without once acknowledging I existed. I stood in the middle of that marble floor in my worn hoodie and the shoes I'd grabbed in 60 seconds, and understood, fully and finally, that I had not escaped danger. I had simply changed its address. Sit. He gestured toward a low white sofa without looking at me, already moving toward a desk near the window, glass-topped, completely clear except for a single open folder and a phone. He picked up the phone, said something low and precise into it, set it down. I sat. I looked around carefully, the way you look around a place when you're trying to memorize the exits. The walls were mostly bare except for one, a large display panel cycling silently through what looked like security feeds, docks, a restaurant, a parking structure, streets I didn't recognize. Not a home, a command center wearing a home's clothes. The woman in the gray blazer returned, set a glass of water in front of me, and left again. I didn't touch it. "You're scared of the water," the man said from across the room, still not looking at me. "I'm scared of everything right now." My voice came out steadier than I expected. He turned then, studied me with that same measuring quiet from the car. "My name is Tae-chon. You are safe in this building. You will have a room. You will not leave without telling me first." He paused, letting each sentence land before adding the next. "These are not suggestions." I looked at the security feeds cycling on the wall, at the guards by the door, at the folder on his desk with its red tab and the small coiled serpent printed in the corner. "Safe," he'd said, but I had just traded one cage for another, and this one was made of gold. The dining table was long enough to seat 12 and set for 2. I didn't understand that at first. I stood at the entrance to the dining room the next morning, still in the oversized sleep shirt the gray blazer woman, Min, I'd learned, had left folded on my bed, and counted the plates like they might rearrange themselves into something that made more sense. Tae-chon was already seated at the head of the table, reading something on a tablet, a cup of tea at his right hand. He didn't look up when I walked in, just gestured once toward the chair to his left with 2 fingers. I sat. A staff member appeared immediately, setting down plate after plate with quiet efficiency. Soft tofu soup, steamed rice, grilled fish, braised vegetables glistening with sesame, a small bowl of pickled things I didn't recognize. More food than I had allowed myself to eat in a single sitting in 3 years. My hands folded in my lap automatically, calculating, negotiating. "The rice is fine, skip the fish, don't touch the sauce." "You're doing it again," Tae-chon said without looking up from his tablet. I blinked. "Doing what?" "Counting." He turned a page. "Stop." My face warmed. "I'm not." "You've been sitting for 40 seconds and you haven't touched anything." Now he looked up. Those dark, steady eyes moved across my face with that same clinical attention. "Eat." "I'm not very hungry." He set the tablet down, folded his hands, gave me the particular quality of silence that I was quickly learning meant he was choosing his next words the way other people chose weapons. In this apartment, you will eat at this table every morning. You will take what is offered. You will not negotiate with your own plate. A pause. Whatever he taught you about your appetite, unlearn it. In my house, you take up space. The words landed somewhere deep and undefended. I felt my throat tighten in a way I hated, that burning precursor to tears I refused to shed in front of this man. Mike used to monitor my plate, count my portions with his eyes before I could count them myself, then use the number, too many, too few, as ammunition for whichever version of cruelty he felt like that evening. I had stopped being hungry years ago. Hunger felt like a vulnerability I couldn't afford. I picked up the spoon. The soup was warm and impossibly good, clean and deep, the kind of thing that tasted like someone had made it carefully. I took a second spoonful before I'd finished deciding to. Tae-chon said nothing. He simply returned to his tablet and lifted his own tea, as though nothing significant had happened. But something had. I finished the soup. I ate the rice. I tried the braised vegetables and then ate them all. I took up space, and the world, remarkably, didn't end.
Men took me shopping on a Tuesday. Not because I asked, because Tae-chon had looked at me across the breakfast table that morning, assessed my borrowed clothes with a single glance, and said, "Men will take you at 10." And that was the entirety of the conversation. The boutique was the kind of place that didn't display prices. Ivory walls, soft lighting, garments spaced so far apart on their racks they looked like exhibits. The kind of store that decided whether it liked you before you'd touched a single thing. It didn't like me. The manager materialized the moment we walked in, a tall woman, angular and polished, with the practiced smile of someone who used warmth as a screening tool. It flickered when she looked at me. Not dramatically, just a small recalibration, a dimming, the kind most people were trained to not notice. I noticed. I had spent years developing a finely tuned sensitivity to the exact moment a room decided I didn't belong in it. She directed herself entirely toward Min, pulled pieces for her approval, made suggestions for her consideration, responded to her questions. When I reached out to touch the sleeve of a deep green dress, the manager's eyes moved to my hand with an expression she almost managed to keep off her face. Almost. "That one runs quite small," she said. Her voice was pleasant, the meaning underneath it wasn't. Min went very still beside me. I set the sleeve down, folded the familiar feeling back into the familiar place. It's fine. It doesn't matter. You're used to this. Except Min had already stepped away and was on her phone. The call lasted under a minute. She returned to my side without a word, and we continued browsing in the particular charged silence of something that hadn't happened yet. Tae-chon arrived 11 minutes later. He didn't raise his voice. He walked in with the unhurried authority of a man who understood that the most powerful thing in any room was composure, and he crossed the floor to where the manager stood, and he spoke to her quietly and directly for approximately 30 seconds. I couldn't hear all of it. I caught my "guest of your," "last day," and something in Korean that made Min press her lips together. The manager's polished expression dissolved. What replaced it was smaller, uncertain, stripped of its architecture. Tae-chon turned away from her before she'd finished her response, a dismissal so clean it was almost elegant, and walked to where I was standing near the green dress. He lifted it from the rack without hesitation and held it out to me. "Try it," he said. Not a suggestion, not a kindness wrapped in performance, just a simple, direct restoration of something that should never have been taken. I took the dress. Behind us, I heard the manager begin to cry quietly. Tae-chon didn't turn around. Neither did I. I found it on a Thursday, which felt wrong somehow. Revelations like this should arrive during storms, in the middle of the night, with some theatrical warning. Not on a quiet afternoon with pale sunlight coming through the penthouse windows while Min was out and Tae-chon was in a meeting behind closed doors. I wasn't snooping, that's what I told myself. I was looking for a pen. The desk drawer was slightly open, and the folder was right there, its red tab facing up, that small, coiled serpent printed in the corner, the same one I'd noticed my first night here and filed away in the part of my brain reserved for things I wasn't ready to examine. I looked at the door to the meeting room. Closed. Quiet. I opened the folder. It took me a moment to understand what I was reading. The document was dense, figures, dates, a chain of transfers logged with the cold precision of an accountant who felt nothing. But certain things rose to the surface quickly, the way debris rises after something sinks. My name, printed in clean type in the upper margin next to a reference number. Mike's name below it, listed as the originating party, and a figure, a number with enough zeros to make my vision blur, marked as settled in full and stamped with a date 3 days after I'd climbed into the back of Tae-chon's sedan. The Blue Serpent, a rival syndicate. Mike had sold my debt to them before I'd even found the burner phone, had been negotiating my transfer for weeks while I was still learning which silences were safe and which ones weren't. And Tae-chon had purchased that debt, every dollar of it, transferred it cleanly out of their hands and into his own. He hadn't rescued me, he had acquired me. The folder shook slightly in my hands. I set it down and pressed my palms flat against the desk and breathed the way I'd taught myself to breathe when the ground stopped being reliable. Slow, measured, through the nose. I had left one man who thought he owned me and walked directly into the orbit of another who had paid for the privilege in writing. The meeting room door opened. Tae-chon stepped out, phone in hand, pausing mid-sentence in whatever he was saying when he saw me at the desk. His eyes moved to the open folder, then back to my face. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look guilty. He looked at me the way he always looked at me, with that measuring, unreadable stillness, and ended his call. The silence between us was different now, denser, shaped by what we both knew I knew. "You were going to tell me," I said. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. He said nothing. "Were you ever going to tell me?" I said again, and this time it wasn't a question. He crossed the room, picked up the folder, and closed it. "Sit down, Fiona," he said quietly, and God help me, I did. It arrived in a black box with no return address. Min brought it to the breakfast table on a silver tray, her face carefully neutral in the way it only got when something required careful neutrality. Tae-chon looked at it for a moment without touching it, then said something quiet to the guard behind him, who left the room immediately. I watched all of this and said nothing. Tae-chon opened the box. Inside, nested in a bed of white silk, was a ring. Gold band, large stone, the kind of piece that announced itself. Wrapped around it, a strip of paper no wider than a finger, with 4 words printed in clean block letters. "We know she's there." The temperature in the room didn't change, but something did. Some invisible atmospheric shift, the way the air changes before lightning, pressure building without a sound. Tae-chon folded the paper once, set it aside, and closed the box. Then he continued drinking his tea. I stared at the side of his face. "That's about me." "Yes." "The Blue Serpent." "Yes." I set down my spoon. The soup I'd been eating, the same soft tofu soup I'd eaten every morning for 2 weeks, the one I'd quietly started to love, suddenly had no taste. "They sent a ring. A warning." He said it the way someone says rain or Tuesday, a simple condition of the world. "They want me to know they're watching, that you are a liability I'm sheltering, that continuing to do so will cost me." I heard the full architecture of that sentence, every load-bearing word. "I'm bait," I said. He didn't deny it. That was somehow worse than if he had. The thing about realizing you're a chess piece is that it doesn't arrive as a shock. It arrives as a confirmation, a final click of something that was always slightly loose, locking into place. I had been a pawn in Mike's game, a figure to be traded, a problem to be moved from one column to another, and now I was sitting in a penthouse eating expensive soup while 2 criminal empires calculated my value in a language I was only just learning to read. Is that all I am to you? Strategic inconvenience? Tae-chon turned to look at me then, full attention, both eyes, the kind of looking he reserved for things he was deciding about. You are a complication, one I chose. That's not an answer. It's the most honest one I have. I pushed back from the table and stood, because I needed to be standing, needed the small dignity of height and distance and the choice to move my own body where I decided. I won't be moved around a board, I said. Not by Mike, not by the blue serpent. I looked at him directly, and not by you. Something shifted behind his eyes, not quite surprise. Something closer to interest. He picked up his tea. Then stop acting like a piece, he said quietly, and start acting like a player. He said it without cruelty, almost like an invitation. I stood there for a long moment, the city sprawling, silent, and glittering behind him, and felt something old and defeated begin, slowly and painfully, to loosen its grip.
The panic room was behind the bookshelf in the third guest suite. Min showed it to me that afternoon with the brisk efficiency of someone running through a safety procedure they hoped would never matter. Reinforced steel door, 6-inch walls, enough provisions for 72 hours, a direct line to Tae-chon's head of security. "You'll go in when we arrive," Min said, "and come out when he sends the code." I looked at the small, dark room behind the shelf, at its clean, sealed walls and its single chair, and its absolute, total removal from everything happening on the other side. "No," I said. Min blinked. In 2 weeks, I had learned that Min did not blink often. "Mr. Tae-chon's instructions. Tell him I said no." She looked at me for a long moment, recalibrating, then took out her phone. The emerald velvet dress was hanging on the back of my door, where I'd left it after the boutique, still in its garment bag, the one I hadn't opened because wearing it had felt presumptuous, like claiming something I hadn't earned. I unzipped the bag that evening and stepped into it alone, without help, and stood in front of the mirror for a long time. It fit, perfectly, unfairly, like it had been made for a version of me I was only just beginning to believe existed. Tae-chon was waiting at the elevator when I came out. He was in black tie, composed and unreachable as ever, and he looked at me the way he had looked at the blue serpent's warning, with a moment of complete stillness before returning to neutral. "I told you to use the room," he said. "I know. It exists to protect you. It exists to hide me." I held his gaze. "I'm done being hidden." A long pause. The elevator arrived. He stepped aside to let me in first, which told me nothing and somehow told me everything. The gala was held in a building that had no public address, full of people who didn't exist on paper, in a room so beautiful it felt like a threat, women in extraordinary clothes, and men with the particular ease of people who had never once feared consequences, laughter that knew its own power, eyes that cataloged every entrance including mine. I felt them assess me, who I was with, what I represented, what claim this woman in emerald had on a man like Tae-chon. I had lived my whole life shrinking from rooms that looked at me like this. I kept my shoulders back, I held Tae-chon's arm and smiled at the right moments, and watched the room the way he'd taught me, without teaching me. With patience, with attention, with the quiet understanding that information was everywhere if you stopped being afraid long enough to collect it. Halfway through the evening, I noticed the man near the east balcony door. He'd been in the same position for 40 minutes. His drink was untouched. His eyes hadn't moved from Tae-chon once. I leaned close. "East balcony," I said quietly. "Dark jacket. He's not here to celebrate." Tae-chon didn't turn his head, but his hand, resting at the small of my back, pressed once, firm and brief. Not a dismissal, an acknowledgement. I stood a little straighter and kept watching.
I saw it because I was still watching. That was the only reason. Not training, not instinct honed by years of field work, just the habit I'd built over the last 3 weeks of paying attention to everything, because paying attention had always been my only reliable form of survival. The red dot appeared on the wall behind Tae-chon's left shoulder, small and precise as a period at the end of a sentence. It moved once, a tiny recalibrating drift, and then steadied. finding its target. My body moved before my mind finished the thought. I didn't say his name, didn't shout a warning. There was no time for language, no space between the seeing and the doing. I turned and drove my full weight into Tae-chon's chest, both hands flat against the lapels of his jacket, and took us both sideways behind the nearest marble column in one violent, graceless motion. The glass behind where he'd been standing exploded inward. The room erupted, screaming, the percussion of overturned furniture, the immediate controlled chaos of security teams who had been waiting for exactly this and dreading it. Someone killed the overhead lights. Emergency strips along the floor threw everything into red and shadow. Tae-chon had caught me on the way down, one arm locked around my back with a reflexive precision that told me his body knew how to fall safely even when his mind hadn't caught up yet. We hit the floor together, and for a moment neither of us moved. His hand pressed flat against the back of my head, keeping it down, my fingers still twisted in his lapels. His heart was pounding, I could feel it through the fabric. Good, I thought wildly. So is mine. There's a shooter, I said into his collar. East side elevated. The balcony man was the distraction. A beat of silence. Around us, the room was still moving, still loud, security converging from every angle. How long were you watching him? Tae-chon said. His voice was controlled. Almost. 40 minutes. His grip on me tightened once. Brief, involuntary, the kind of thing a composed man does when composure briefly fails him, and then he was already moving, pulling me upright with him, one hand firm on my arm as two of his guards materialized from the dark and formed a wall around us. They got us out through a service corridor. Metal doors, bare concrete, the smell of cold air and kitchen grease. I was still in the emerald dress, one shoe slightly twisted, adrenaline rewriting everything inside me into something loud and electric. In the corridor, Tae-chon stopped walking. He turned to look at me, really look at me, in the flat industrial light that hid nothing and flattered no one. His collar was askew. There was a small cut on his jaw from the shattered glass. He looked at me like I was something he was seeing for the first time. "You pulled me down," he said. "Yes." Without hesitation. "Yes." He was quiet for a long moment, the sounds of his security team moving around us, radios crackling, the distant wail of sirens beginning somewhere above. Then something moved across his face, not quite the careful neutrality I'd catalogued over weeks, not the measuring assessment, not the cold authority. Something underneath all of that, older and less practiced. "Are you hurt?" he asked. The question was so quiet I almost missed it. "No," I said. He nodded once. Then he straightened his collar, rebuilt his composure around himself like a coat, and turned back to his guards. But his hand, when it found the small of my back to guide me forward, didn't move for the rest of the night.
The traitor's name was Sung-jin. I learned this the same way I'd learned most things in Tae-chon's world, by being present, by watching, by becoming the kind of woman a room forgot to guard its words around. Sung-jin had been Tae-chon's second for 11 years. He had also been feeding the Blue Serpent information for 3. The docks were Tae-chon's territory, warehouses, shipping containers, the whole cold industrial sprawl of it lit by floodlights and the distant glow of the city across the water. We arrived at midnight in a convoy of 3 vehicles, and I was not in the panic room, and no one had suggested it this time. I stayed close and I kept watching. Sung-jin broke inside the second warehouse. I heard it happen, the shift in his voice, the particular register of a man whose story has finally run out of road, and then everything accelerated. 2 of his men produced weapons from somewhere, the kind of situation that collapsed from tense to catastrophic in under 4 seconds, and in the chaos of bodies and shouting and the crack of a single gunshot, I lost sight of Tae-chon entirely. What I had instead was a crane. The operator's cab sat elevated above the warehouse floor, its controls simple enough. I'd grown up watching my uncle run equipment on construction sites summer after summer, the levers and their logic burned into somewhere useful in my memory. I was up the ladder before I'd fully decided to climb it. Sung-jin had Tae-chon against the far wall. His remaining man was covering the room. Neither of them was looking up. I found the right lever, took one breath. The crane's load, a shipping container, 3 tons of solid steel, swung wide and fast and came down on Sung-jin's man with a percussion that shook the entire building. The distraction lasted exactly long enough. Tae-chon moved, swift and absolute, and it was over. The warehouse went quiet. I climbed back down the ladder slowly, legs trembling now that the adrenaline had somewhere to go, and crossed the floor to where Tae-chon stood. He was watching me walk toward him with an expression I had never seen on his face before, fully unguarded, stripped of every layer of careful control, something vast and unmanaged moving behind his eyes. He reached into his jacket and produced a folder, thin, red-tabbed, the small coiled serpent in the corner. My ledger.
He held it for a moment. Then he walked to the nearest floodlight, and he held the folder to the heat until the corner caught, and he let it burn. Let it go to ash and drift in pieces to the concrete floor. I watched my debt disappear. "That was the last copy," he said. I looked at him across the small, warm light of what had been my ownership papers. "So what am I now?" He crossed the distance between us, stood close enough that I could see the cut still healing on his jaw, the one from the gala, the one I had technically caused by saving his life. "Equal," he said, simply, finally, like a man who had spent weeks arriving at a word and was certain of it now. My equal, in everything. I held his gaze. All those weeks of smallness, of calculating, of making myself fit whatever space I was permitted, all of it present in this moment and releasing, slowly, like a breath held too long. "Then act like it," I said. For the first time in all the weeks I had known him, Tae-chon smiled. Not the controlled, almost smile I'd catalogued from a distance, a real one, brief and unguarded and entirely his. He offered his hand. I took it, and somewhere in the cold dark of those docks, with ash still drifting and the city glittering across the water, Fiona, who had once learned to take up as little space as possible, became something she had never been allowed to be. Unmovable, unowned, exactly enough. And that's where we leave her. Not running, not hiding, not calculating how much space she's allowed to take up in a room that was never built for her, but standing in the cold dark of those docks, hand in hand with the most dangerous man in the city, having just burned the last document that ever tried to put a price on her life. Fiona came into this story with 60 seconds, 1 pair of shoes, and a bruise yellowing on her arm. She left it a queen. Here's what I want you to sit with. She didn't become powerful because Tae-chon gave her power. She became visible because she refused over and over again to stay hidden. She ate at the table. She wore the dress. She stayed on that floor when every instinct told her to run. She watched the room when everyone else was performing for it. And when the moment came, not once but twice, she moved without hesitation toward the person worth protecting. That's not a love story about being rescued. That's a story about a woman who rescued herself, one small, defiant choice at a time, and found someone finally worthy of standing beside her. If this story held you, if you felt Fiona's hunger, her fear, her slow and hard-won becoming, then this community is exactly where you belong. Hit that subscribe button right now, turn on your notifications so you never miss a chapter, because the stories we tell here are always about the ones who were counted out and came back unrecognizable. Drop a comment below and tell me, which moment hit you hardest? Was it the soup, the burning ledger, the crane? I read every single one. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that surviving something doesn't mean you're defined by it. And if you're watching this from a place that feels a little too much like Fiona's beginning, hold on, keep watching, keep choosing the next small, defiant thing. The dragon's car is closer than you think. Subscribe, share, come back for the next one. We're just getting started.